Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Sybiz Visipay Single Touch Payroll webinar for May 2018. And thank you very much for joining us. And one thing you'll note on the opening slide here is that we have a URL there, www.sybiz.com/STP. And I suggest you, at the very least, write that down or bookmark it, because you'll be wanting to revisit that page a number of times over the next few weeks as we get ready for the launch on the 1st of July for Single Touch Payroll. My name is Ben O'Brien. I'm one of the directors here at Sybiz Software, and just before we get too carried away, I'm just going to do a sound check. So if you could just click on the hand icon in your GoToWebinar panel. Excellent. I can definitely see that lots of people are going to hear, so thank you for that. We did have some trouble with the GoToWebinar service in March when we had the first round of STP webinars, so it's just important to do that sound check. Okay, just before we get too far into it, just the standard disclaimer when we are talking about things like this. As you know, Sybiz is a software development house, and whilst there's accountants dotted around throughout the company, that's not, we're not, I guess, accountants in public practice providing advice to clients. We are software developers, and therefore, if you do need to get legal, accounting, professional advice, go to those advisors accordingly. So the information that we are presenting is for general purposes only. And you can, of course, seek information from the Australian Taxation Office as well. Just one other little key point there as well is that there have been some rumours circulating that there could be a deferral in STP, and we are proceeding at Sybiz on the basis that it will be live from the 1st of July 2018. And if there is an 11th hour decision made in Canberra to defer STP for everyone, that is not known at the time of recording this webinar. Yeah, certainly if you are watching the recording down the track, things may have changed, but certainly just to point that out, at this point in time, we are proceeding on the basis that STP will be up and running from the 1st of July 2018. In terms of what we'll be covering today, I guess one of the overriding things that we just want to make everyone aware of is just to keep calm about single touch payroll. It's not, I guess, as earth-shattering for the people processing pays. We'll obviously talk about the impact on the payroll process and the overall business processes, but it's not a massive thing above the waterline. Obviously, the systems that drive the single touch payroll reporting, there's been tens of millions of dollars spent on those as a software development industry, and also similar amounts spent on the ATO side of the fence as well. So hopefully that investment has been really good in keeping a good experience for you when it comes to do your reporting through single touch payroll. So of course we'll be talking about getting ready for action, the steps that perhaps you should have already taken, but it's not too late to get started. And then we'll also look at the moving parts that come together to produce the single touch payroll reporting and communication surrounding that. And just for clarity, we'll talk about completing the 2017-18 process. For a lot of you, that will hopefully be the last time you need to do the payment summaries, but we'll just explain it in the context of what you need to do in the software. And one of the things that wasn't actually finalised last time we did the webinars in March 2018 was the employer deferral process, and we'll talk a bit about that toward the end of the session. We'll take around about 45 minutes to get through the content that we have today, and I just wanted to say thank you for posing the questions upon the registration process. So we got hundreds of submissions through that. A lot of you are also too shy to ask any questions, but certainly what we've done is looked at the frequently asked questions and paraphrased them into a bunch of questions we'll cover in the final slides. If you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, by all means put them in your chat box, but what I might just point out as well is just wait until we cover a particular section of the presentation before asking a question, because we may very well be answering that question as part of the presentation anyway. So there we have it. Let's get into it. So just a little bit of a recap for those that came to the March webinars. You would see a fairly similar slide to something that was covered back then. And just in terms of a quick recap, the actual mechanics of what single touch payroll reporting can be thought of as your payment summary annual report, but obviously on a time by time or a pay by pay basis. So it's no longer an annual report. It's each time you pay, you must report. So I should just clarify as well that Sybiz Visipay is geared around the individual non-business type of reporting, and so that is carrying through to single touch payroll as well. So there are some other types of payment summaries under the old regime that aren't individual non-business, but because Sybiz Visipay didn't cater to those under the payment summary annual report, we are not catering to those under single touch payroll as well. So just wanting to clarify that. And I guess one of the key designs of the single touch payroll reporting is that you are reporting the year-to-date balance information each time you do an upload. So if you did care to take a look at the data, certainly that second pay run that you do under STP, if you weren't aware that you're reporting year-to-date balances, that may be a little disconcerting. You may think that all the figures have doubled up, and that's certainly not the case. It's just having that awareness that you are doing year-to-date reporting, and that's a good design feature which will help in terms of making corrections, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. And another one of the, I guess, more stressing design elements of single touch payroll reporting is that it must be reported on or before the date of payment to the employees. So I guess one example of that is that if you typically do the entire payroll process in a single day, so you come in the morning, process the pays, release the pay slips after you've done your checks and balances and corrections, and then release the file to the bank to pay that day, then you will also now need to do your single touch payroll reporting on that day as well. One of the big things when it was first announced back in late 2014 was that the process will remove the burden of the annual administration of doing your payment summary annual report. But what has I guess been watered down since then is that overall the actual admin burden over the course of 12 months is going to be more under single touch payroll. So you've got more admin on a pay by pay basis. So that's the trade-off in removing the annual admin from a payment summary annual report point of view. And I guess the benefits in terms of who's getting the benefit out of the information flow, it is certainly going to be helping not just the ATO but other government agencies in terms of that information flow. So it will help to ensure that employers are paying the employer superannuation guarantee, and it will also help employees in terms of if they are perhaps getting some assistance from Centrelink as they're returning to the workforce, for example, and if their circumstances change such that they've now returned to full-time employment but have neglected to let Centrelink know, then there will be some more immediate detection of those kind of circumstances where the government agencies will then be able to sort of get in contact with the individuals and say, hey, look, we've noticed your earnings have gone through the roof. Is it perhaps because you've returned to full-time work? Because we need to have a chat about the assistance that we're giving you. So rather than getting to the end of the 12-month period and perhaps until a tax return is lodged before getting that tap on the shoulder and perhaps having some big back pay to do, that information flow will certainly help in those kind of things as well. So reduce the chance of nasty surprises in those circumstances. So one of the other things that's been touted about the single touch payroll process is pre-filling of the W1 and W2 boxes on the activity statements. That has been deferred, so that will come in at a later point in time, but certainly if you have read that in any of the press releases as being one of the advantages, just bear in mind that that is not a day one advantage. And just to clarify as well, if you are a substantial employer, and you should have done your headcount assessment with respect to the 1st of April 2018, so you should know at this point in time whether you are a substantial employer, but just I guess in summary form, that is if you have 20 or more employees, then you will need to be reporting from the 1st of July 2018. Now, the legislation is still bouncing around in Canberra in terms of other employers as well, but certainly the momentum is that pretty much all other employers, there are some fringe cases that won't get picked up through STP reporting, but we won't bother about those. Yeah, everyone else will be going live from the 1st of July 2019 for single touch payroll. And just in terms of another slide that we looked at back in March, the top section there has been greyed out deliberately because these are the things that you should have done by now. So you should have upgraded to Sybiz Visipay 1710, and we will be doing another update before the 1st of July 2018. So one point that we made back in March is that we as Sybiz are deliberately not switching on or enabling STP reporting in Visipay for the 2017-18 financial year. It's something that we're only wanting you to do from the 2018-19, so that's why we're doing the 17-20 release quite late in June. If you haven't yet upgraded to at least version 17, just bear in mind that you will, with the assistance of your business partner, just have to check your version of Microsoft SQL. It now needs to be version 2012 or above. So that's just something, if you are saving things to the last minute, that could be quite disruptive if you're not aware of upgrading your SQL version prior to that point in time. And we will talk a little bit more about the completing and correcting of the data on the next couple of slides, but I guess the big difference between what is reported through single touch payroll in comparison to the payment summary annual report is that there's now categorization of allowances, and so there's a set lot of categories that the ATO has prescribed. They're very much in line with the individual work-related deduction categories on the individual tax return forms. And as I said, you should have done your headcount with respect to the 1st of April 2018. In a lot of the registration questions that came through for the webinar registrations, a lot of people did ask questions regarding the headcount, and that's quite surprising because that certainly should be something that is well and truly done and dusted by now. But yeah, it's clear that some people are still a little bit confused, so we will touch on a couple of those items. And you should also have refined your onboarding procedures to collect more information when a person starts work. So up until now, I guess all you've really needed is their name and their bank details to be able to pay them. But certainly there's more information required to flow through the STP reporting process, and perhaps some of that information you didn't really need to get into Visipay until you did your payment summary annual report in previous years. But certainly under STP, you will need more information to be complete and correct. And of course, you've registered for these webinars, that goes without saying. And the final 2 points there, I guess they're the key points of what this session is primarily about. You will have a do-it-yourself sign-up process to what we're calling the employer portal, and I'll make this point as often as I can throughout the session just to say that the employer portal is separate and distinct to the ATO business portal. So you cannot do single touch payroll reporting through the ATO business portal. You may see some of the information flowing through into the business portal, but don't get confused and think that that is the process that you use to report through single touch payroll. So the employer portal is a third-party portal which Sybiz has partnered with to basically give a range of advantages to the Sybiz customer base over and above what would have occurred if there was a direct connection into the ATO, but we'll obviously talk about that. So around about the middle of June, there will be a announcement made that the sign-on process is ready to go, and I guess the key point at this point in time, just to be aware of, is that you will need to sign up to the employer portal prior to doing your first STP submission. And as I mentioned earlier, 1720 will be released in late June, and you will also need to update to that version prior to doing your first STP reporting. So just one point to clarify on there, just using a scenario of perhaps someone going on leave just before the 1st of July, and they've got a pay perhaps due on the 3rd of July, and they want to sort of get that processed in Visipay before they go on leave, and with the idea that they'll then finalise that process with EFTs and payslips, etc., when they return from leave. If you're on an earlier version of Visipay at the time that you process pays, then as long as you've upgraded to 1720 prior to doing your STP reporting, that information will carry through as it should. So you don't need to be on 1720 to process the first pay for STP reporting, but you will need to be on 1720 prior to doing your STP reporting. So hopefully that makes sense there. And yeah, as I mentioned, some of the things relating to 1710, so this was covered in the previous round of webinars as well, but in the options area within the software, which is probably not something that a lot of people go into on a regular basis, that is where the single touch payroll activation area is set within the software. So this isn't an automatic process, so you control this, and there's a number of reasons for that. We don't know if you, for example, end up getting an employer deferral. Sybiz doesn't know that, so we don't want to automatically turn this on for you because then that would constrain you into single touch payroll reporting. Similarly, as you finalise your 2017-18 financial year using the old payment summary annual report, you may wish to toggle this on and off, this setting on and off for that purpose. So that is something just to keep in mind, that you are in control of turning single touch payroll on and off. The categorization of allowances is another point that I mentioned earlier, but just to give a bit more information on that, you've got your 6 categories there. So other is your floating category. But yeah, the idea is that if you have allowances that included on payment summaries, then they need to be categorized as best as you can into one of those 5 categories, or if it doesn't fit into one of those 5 categories, into the other category there. So I guess just to clarify, a point that I didn't make in the March webinars was that it is only really related to those allowances that you used to include on payment summaries, because they're the same allowances that are going to be included in the single touch payroll reporting. So mechanically behind the scenes, in terms of the classification of allowances, nothing has changed there. You can, if you wanted to use this moment to just reflect on your own categorization of your allowances to make sure that they're correct, certainly go to the ATO's website and have a look at the information as to whether certain allowances are reportable, taxable, etc. If you have allowances that aren't on payment summaries, you can still categorise them. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and it wouldn't surprise me if once single touch payroll is bedded down in, say, 2 or 3 years' time, the ATO might sort of cast the net a bit wider and say, hey, we've found through some of our compliance work that some employers are miscategorising allowances, and in that sense, we want to now see all of the allowances, and that will flow through in single, or perhaps will flow through single touch payroll. So yeah, you may want to categorise all of your allowances at this point, but it's up to you. And the complete and correct employee records, and this is, I guess, the line in the sand where you do want to make sure that you gather some good information when your employees start. Of course, you do need certain information to go through the TFN declaration process, but if you're still doing those on PDFs or with pen and paper, then you don't necessarily need to put things like the address details in your software until you do traditionally the annual reporting process for payment summaries. But if you're a bit casual in that respect up until now, certainly change that behaviour and get the information as complete and correct as possible from day one. So things like the address and date of birth, where that comes in critically handy is that if you employ someone who is new to the workforce and they're going through the process of applying for a tax file number, then if you're using a placeholder tax file number for them until they get their real one, then if their name and address and date of birth details are all okay, then what will happen behind the scenes when they get their proper tax file number and you upload that data to the ATO, then the ATO will do their own matching behind the scenes. So you won't need to let them know that this person now has a legit tax file number. If the information all matches apart from the tax file number, then they will make that change for you behind the scenes and get everything into the right bucket. So that's why it's critically important just to refine those onboarding processes and gather that information from day one when new employees join. And on to, I guess, the meatier part of the presentation to give you some clarity as to how to report, etc., and what the moving parts are within the process, and also why we've made some of these decisions at Sybiz. From a Sybiz Visipay point of view, it is really pretty much business as usual. So typically you'll go through a process of entering the pays, running some reports, doing your checks and balances, making any corrections that you need to make, running your reports again perhaps, and then releasing the pay slips and sending the EFT file off to the bank. So none of that is really changing as far as the day-to-day payroll process is concerned, but you will have to undergo some additional processes in terms of STP reporting, which we'll zero in on in just a moment. The next part of the puzzle is the employer portal, and again, this is not the ATO business portal. And I guess just to put it in context, if you are using the Sybiz Super service for your SuperStream reporting, it's actually the same entity behind the employer portal as is providing that Sybiz Super service as well. So we've had a long-term relationship with that party, so we're very satisfied to continue that relationship for single touch payroll purposes. So once you've done your STP reporting through Visipay, the information will be sent securely to the employer portal, who will then match it based on the ABN. So that's why you need to register for the employer portal before you do your single touch payroll reporting. And the benefits of the employer portal is that it has an inbuilt retry mechanism. So the ATO servers have been quite unreliable in recent years, and that is obviously one of the I guess risk areas of the STP project. And so by partnering with an employer portal, that takes away the burden from you in terms of if you are trying to submit your STP and if you were going direct to the ATO and the ATO servers were down, you'd have to do that retry and try again in a couple hours, and that could take quite some time. So by submitting through the employer portal, that will do the retrying for you in the event that the ATO servers are down. It also provides an extra layer of data validation. Obviously, there's some data validation on the Visipay side of the fence, but then there'll be another layer of that on the employer portal side of the fence as well, which is another really good benefit. The employer portal will also transform the information that you've sent from Visipay and package it up into the proper format to send on to the ATO, so that's a real big tick as well. It'll give you some reporting capability, so as you sign up to the portal and the data flows through, you'll be able to have a look at some of that data and also look at some of the messaging that's coming back and forward as far as that's concerned. So the information exchange will be conducted through the employer portal, so there will be some interpretation of the messages coming from the ATO, so that you're not getting stuff that looks like it's all computerized and hard to interrogate. It'll be made into much more friendly text, so that it'll give you more information as to what perhaps has gone wrong in that process, or hopefully has gone right. And as I said, the employer portal is being provided by the same organisation that the Sybiz SuperStream option is carried through, and certainly we will do, once everyone's up and running on the portal, we will do some more information sharing around the SuperStream option as well. So once the employer portal does its thing, it will then securely send the information on to the Australian Taxation Office, and they will do their thing with it. And they do have a 72-hour service level. So I guess if you are a part-time payroll officer, or perhaps the payroll duty is just one of your umpteen duties that you perform for your organisation, and you're used to sort of getting the pays out of the way and moving on to all of the other things that you do, this is a little bit different under single touch payroll because they do, sorry, the ATO does have a 72-hour service level to communicate back to you. So you will need to keep an ear to the ground, and the employer portal will help in that process as well. So that's the moving parts and how they come together for single touch payroll reporting. Over the next few slides, I'm just going to be talking about your, I guess, the path of least resistance, vanilla process to say, okay, once you're up and running and you're used to what is required from a single touch payroll reporting process, what is the additional work that will be typically required over and above what you're currently doing when you process pays. And I guess just to stress as well that the single touch payroll reporting is an automated process. It's not automatic. So the reason for that is that you, just like the distribution of pay slips or the uploading of the EFT file doesn't occur as soon as you hit the process button in payroll, the STP reporting process gives you that opportunity to do your checks and balances, make any corrections before releasing the information to the ATO. So just bear that in mind. And once you've done your checks and balances and processed your corrections, etc., and done everything else that you currently do in the payroll process, then you'd be following this process. So you'd be going to the ATO transfer area, so that's where you'd currently be going once every 12 months to do your payment summary annual report. And you'd be clicking on that button, and as long as you've got the STP option ticked in your system options area, then you will get some different screens compared to what you currently get for the payment summary annual reports. So don't worry too much about what's on the screen at the moment, especially the bottom section there when it talks about events. We'll clarify that in just a moment. But yeah, essentially what we're looking to do here is just sort of gearing it for, as I said, the path of least resistance, to sort of say, okay, you've done your payroll process, so anyone that you've paid since your last reporting has occurred, we're going to assume that you're going to want to report the update, or sorry, report the year-to-date information for those employees. And so you'll have a selection screen where you get to include or exclude. By default, if someone has been paid since you did your last STP reporting, then the include flag will be on there. But if there's something that for whatever reason you decided to exclude an employee for this particular reporting process, then you obviously can do that. But yeah, by default, we will have the include flag on for everyone that has been paid. The final event indicator, we'll talk about that in a moment as well to give you the context of that. And the declaration down the bottom is verbatim what the ATO has asked us to ask you to do each time that you report through single touch payroll. So that is just FYI. So until you acknowledge that you're authorised to do the lodgement and it's all true and correct and all of that, you won't be able to click the submit button. There's also going to be a preview button on this screen as well, which will give you the ability just to sort of check things before you click submit. Okay, on to a bit of the lingo. So we have pay events, update events, and final event indicators. So let's explain what they're all about. So the pay event, that is essentially per employee that's been paid, there will be a record that is sent through the single touch payroll reporting. So this is your typical event to send the updated year-to-date balance information for that employee to the ATO, and it can be thought of as roughly equivalent to the old employee line in the payment summary annual report file. If you've ever looked at one of those files, it is just a flat text file and easy to read. The single touch payroll files, however, are very different and a lot harder to read. And yeah, so in that sense, there's mechanically a lot of difference behind the scenes in terms of the construct of the files and the information they're in. And as I said, it is the year-to-date info that is being sent up through that process. Now, the update events, you can use these primarily for corrections, but just on that, you do have 14 days to submit a correction. That's the window of opportunity. So what that means is that if you pay weekly or fortnightly, then you can use the next pay event for those corrections. So you don't need to do a separate update event for employees that you will be paying again in a week or fortnight. But if there's a situation such as, you want to submit a final event indicator for an employee that has no more pays to process, but you just forgot to put the final event indicator on the last pay, then that you'd be doing an update event for and putting the final event indicator on, and that would flow through that process. If you are paying monthly, just to clarify that if you do need to make a correction, that will need to go through the update event process, because obviously every single month is greater than 14 days, and so you won't be able to use the next pay event to do those corrections. So hopefully that's not too confusing, and we'll have a bucket load of information that'll clarify all of these things. We'll release that around the middle of June when the employer portal is ready for sign-on. And the final event indicator. Now this is something that I guess you need to be a little bit aware of at this point in time, but as we get to the end of the 2018-19 financial year, so your first financial year under STP reporting, this is going to be critically important, because what you will need to do is for each employee that you've paid throughout the course of the year, you will need to ensure that their records are set to the final event indicator being on, because this is the flag that lets the ATO know that the information is ready to release through to the tax return pre-fill, etc. So even if you put the final event indicator on an employee record, perhaps they've resigned or retired in December and you've paid them their last pay, you can do the final event indicator then, but the pre-fill information for tax returns doesn't get released until at least the 30th of June each year. That may change, the ATO may change that policy down the track, but yeah, just be aware that if you do click the final event indicator on, that's not going to magically have the pre-fill sent through to the employee's tax return at that point. And I guess where this is critically important, and where you, and obviously we'll emphasise this around this time next year, that if you don't complete the process of putting the final event indicator on all of your employee records that you've paid within that financial year, then you will need to use the old payment summary and a report process as well. So that's sending the old MDUP file up to the ATO as part of that process as well. Now, in the first few years, what's going to be happening is the cutoff date for doing your final event indicator, that's going to be shaded back, so it's quite generous in the first year, but eventually that will be pegged back to the intended date, which I think is 14 days after the end of the financial year. But obviously we'll talk a lot more about that this time next year. Okay, so that's the events and the final event indicators. And I guess the next bit of lingo to talk about is the STP messages. So essentially the messages are basically per employee pay record. There's a message, so that message could be a pay event or an update event that's sent through the employer portal, and the fee structure of the employer portal has been built around the volume of messages that are transmitted through. So I guess in terms of how many messages you're likely to be sending through, here's a couple of examples. If you have 50 employees that you pay on a monthly basis, and you have on average 5 update events per month, and that means you're putting through 55 messages per month. Another example is 200 employees paid weekly, and you use the pay events for corrections, so you don't do the update events, then you're looking at sort of 800 to 1,000 messages per month. And when it comes time to sign up to the employer portal, you'll go through a self-assessment process to do a little back-of-the-napkin calculation as to how many messages you're likely to be putting through the employer portal, and that will then determine what band of fee structure you fall into. So, okay, the employer portal sign-up process itself, that is around about 3 to 5 minutes per employer. So if you have a Visipay license which entitles you to 5 company databases concurrently, you may only have the one company database, therefore one employer needs to sign up on a single employer portal, and that'll take you 3 to 5 minutes. But if, for example, you have 5 employers in your license, then each employer will need to sign up to the employer portal. Even for the largest Visipay customer out there with over 50 companies that are part of their license. It's going to be maybe up to 5 hours, or hopefully only about 3 hours to go through and do this process, this sign-up process. This is a once-off process, so you don't need to do it every year. So it's just a little bit of admin for this first year of single touch payroll. So again, we'll have more information around the middle of June as to what's required to go through this process of signing up. And again, this does need to be done prior to you doing your first STP submission through Sybiz Visipay. And in terms of completing 2017-18, as I said, you've got that toggle switch in the options area of your software. So if you're on version 17.10 and you've turned that switch on, just to have a little bit of a look-see as to some of the things that are different once that flag has been switched on. In a couple of weeks' time, when it comes to do your payment summary and a report for 2017-18, you will need to go back and take that STP switch and turn it off. Similarly, if you need to do a prior year correction to your payment summary and a report after you've rolled into the 2018-19 financial year, you will temporarily just need to go back to that options area, uncheck the STP flag, do your prior year ATO transfer, and once that's complete, go back to options and turn STP back on. So, and I guess another point there as well is that if you say didn't do your final event indicator process in 15 months time or whenever the cutoff is, and you did need to also submit through the MDUPE process, you'd then need to go back to options, uncheck STP, and so on and so forth. So that's why we haven't automated that process. You'll need to be in control of that STP flag. But so yeah, I guess the big takeaway there is that it's your normal end of financial year process to do your payment summary run there as well. So if you are a smaller employer, you should be on at least version 16.10 for the end of the 2017-18 financial year. Prior versions of Visipay won't be successful in terms of lodging your payment summary and reports. And I guess it's also timely just to advise that irrespective of whether you're a small employer or a substantial employer, Sybiz's policy is always to recommend that you are on the latest version of Sybiz Visipay for any end of financial year. And just a couple other things, not necessarily related to STP, but obviously it's going to be a very distracting year with the move to single touch payroll. The recent federal budget, there were some new tax scales that were proposed. That legislation is still before Parliament, but it's likely due to bipartisan support to pass. So do expect to see the tax file updates, the tax scale updates come through when you roll from 2017-18 into 2018-19. And another bit of legislation that may drop before the 1st of July as well is to close what the ATO are calling a loophole, in which the salary sacrifice of employees could be considered discharging all or part of an employer's ESG obligations. So just to, I guess, put that in context, up until this legislation passes, if you had an employee that was salary sacrificing 9.5% of their pay, then as an employer, technically you didn't need to pay anything toward their super, because you could include the salary sacrifice to super as part of their ESG bundle. So there's no changes to Sybiz Visipay required whether or not this legislation passes. This will be a change required to your own processes if you have been leveraging salary sacrifice super as part of your ESG obligations. Another thing that I don't have on the slides is just for working holiday makers. Obviously that was a fairly big event when it was thrust upon us partway through a financial year, which was quite stupid, but anyway, we got through that. But if you are employing working holiday makers, there are some nuances that continue on with respect to working holiday makers, and that's mainly around if they change the nature of their employment. So if they come to you on one of the visas that is related to working holiday makers, but whilst they're working for you, they perhaps apply for another visa that allows them to basically be employed as a normal salary and wage worker, what you will need to do is basically once they've had their final pay as a working holiday maker, terminate them as far as that employee record is concerned, create a new employee record, and obviously have the earnings type flag changed to the normal salary and wage earning type there, and that will then allow the not only the two payment summaries to be produced, but also it'll give the distinction of the records from an STP reporting point of view as well. So that's our good old friends, the working holiday makers. And just, I guess, the deferrals is the last point to make now. I haven't got a lot of information on this slide because the ATO website is being updated on a very frequent basis. So particularly if you are watching this recording even a few days after it's been recorded, this information may have changed. So I'm just going to refer you to the ATO website. So if you just Google ATO STP employer deferral, that'll take you to the right page. You'll have to scroll down a little bit, but basically there's a form to fill out and some instructions as to the kind of things that you will need to do to satisfy the granting of a deferral. So I guess the main takeaway there is that if you did want to apply for a deferral, so for example, you as the payroll officer may not have upgraded to 1710, but you're going off on 6 weeks leave and you've got 200 allowances to categorise, and there's no way that you're going to do that by the time the 1st of July rolls around, then that you may wish to apply for a deferral through the ATO. So there's a PDF form to fill out, and you will need to satisfy that it's not just a flippant request. You do need to justify the reasons for the deferral. So that is the employer deferral process. Now, again, that is something that wasn't available at the time of our previous webinar series. In terms of where to get more information regarding STP, and I guess just in the context of, as I've said, it's not going to be a huge impost on you in terms of signing up for the employer portal, and it's not going to be a massive additional task to do to produce your STP reports, so yeah, just bear in mind that more information is being published on a regular basis and updated on a regular basis. And so go to ato.gov.au/STP, and they do have a little marker at the bottom of each page letting you know when the page was last updated, and it doesn't necessarily tell you what has updated, but certainly from my take, there's better information about say the employer headcount, for example, on the ATO's website now than there was on the 1st of April when we were meant to do our headcount. So the information is changing. Your external advisors, if you do have or if you do have a need to get some advice that's perhaps interpreting something that's a little bit ambiguous from the ATO, etc., then obviously fall back onto your normal external advisors, accountants, etc., for that. And Sybiz and the business partners can certainly help you implement that advice, but we can't give you that advice. Subscribe to the Sybiz newsletters if you've not done so already. And I should just also point out that you can access the newsletters from within Visipay itself. So just the program button in the top left, you drill down through the help section there, and the customer newsletter link will take you to the archive of customer newsletters. And that's something just to have in the back of your mind, because with spam filters and things like that, even if you've cleared the newsletters to come through, if there's an update to your spam filter, that may get a little bit trigger happy and quarantine our messages. Yeah, just bear in mind that you can go fetch that information yourselves, and also bookmark Sybiz's STP page as well. So we'll be putting a lot more information up by the middle of June, around the time of the employer portal sign up. So it'll talk about some of the different scenarios that you may encounter as you go through the STP reporting process. But as I hope you've seen today, just the employer portal sign up process and the payday by payday reporting process isn't going to be too taxing. And so there's not a hell of a lot to worry about today, but certainly as we get closer to the 1st of July, you will need to be more aware. And also be aware of misinformation. As I said, we have heard rumours that the whole STP thing is being deferred, but that certainly hasn't come out of Canberra. So don't take the taxi driver or bartender's word for it. It is something that you will need to go to official sources. And as I said, at the time of recording this webinar, that's certainly not the case. And there has also been, it's been fairly widely reported that the ATO are not going to be penalising people for not doing the right thing from an STP purpose within the first 12 months. And that has actually been misreported. Essentially what the ATO are saying is that if they tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you've done this incorrectly, and you continue to do it incorrectly, then you will get penalised. But if you get that tap on the shoulder the first time and correct your mistakes, then you've got nothing to worry about there in terms of penalties. So just, as I said, beware of misinformation. And as far as some of the FAQs that we've taken from the sign-on process when you've registered for the webinars, just before I get into these, if you do have any other questions that we haven't covered yet or you can't see on this slide here, put them into your chat box just as I go through this slide. We have run a little bit over time, so we won't take any more questions other than these ones, but hopefully we'll get back to you one-on-one through the chat box, or if there are frequently asked questions coming through, we'll compile those as part of the information that we release after these webinars. So just flying through these questions. First one there is, do I actually have to pay my PAYG and super at the same time as I pay my employees? That's a great question, and certainly when the initial press release came out on the 28th of December 2014, which was quite bizarre timing between Christmas and New Year's, one of the benefits of STP touted in that press release was that the PAYG and super would be paid at the same time, but the industry consultation that followed, particularly with the small business community, said, hey, that's just too much extra admin and too much of an impost on working capital. And so that element of the original STP intention has been parked. That's not to say that in a few years' time, once everything's bedded down, that that may will be put in as a feature of STP down the track, so you will be paying all stakeholders at the same time. That could happen, but certainly on day one, that is no longer part of the STP process. The reportable employer super contributions, and also for that matter, reportable fringe benefits, whether they're 57A or not, basically reported in the same way as they are from the payment summary point of view. So in Sybiz Visipay, you have the option to manually populate the fields with that information, or if you have your pay items configured correctly and your super influence configured correctly, and of course salary sacrifice super is reported as reportable employer super contributions, then just as that has flown through in the payment summary annual report process, that will also flow through in the STP process. So we'll have more detail about that when we release more information in the middle of June as to exactly what to expect there in terms of timing, and that will help you with that. And if you have less than 20 staff, many of you have asked this question as to our advice as to whether you should get into it from the 1st of July 2018, which there's nothing to stop you from doing that. And it is really up to you. Certainly if Sybiz wasn't a substantial employer, I would be sitting out at least the initial few months of STP just to sort of sit back and make sure that the ATO service can handle it and let other people work through those teething problems. But that's just my opinion. You may be a real tech guru and love new bright shiny things and want to get into it straight away. And again, that is fine. That's your decision to make. And yeah, so hopefully that helps answer that question in a indirect way. And a few of you have also drilled down and worked out that STP goes through something called SBR, which is Standard Business Reporting, and the ATO has a website which lists the companies that are doing SBR reporting, and a few of you have noticed that Sybiz isn't listed there. And I guess some of you have probably answered your own question through this session, where the reason Sybiz isn't listed there is because we're going through the employer portal. So the employer portal is doing the heavy lifting in terms of the SBR reporting through to the ATO. So there's nothing to worry about as far as that's concerned, but certainly good detective work for those that have drilled down into that information and quite rightly asked that question. And the categorisation of allowances, again, this is something that I didn't cover too well in March. You don't really have to worry about categorising the non-reportable allowances, but just because something is non-taxable doesn't mean it's non-reportable. And again, none of that treatment of allowances has changed other than the categorisation. But yeah, certainly if it's non-reportable, you can just stick that in the other bucket if you like. Can you use the ATO's business portal? Absolutely not. That won't support the STP reporting process. You will see some information flow through from STP back into the portal, but you can't submit STP reports through the business portal. I've also touched on, obviously a few people have kind of read some stuff that's been in the mainstream media about not getting penalties. The actual verbiage from the ATO, as I said, it's like if they tap you on the shoulder because you're doing something wrong and you continue to do the same thing wrong, you will most likely be penalised. But if you remedy what it is you're doing incorrectly, then you've got, or you should have nothing to worry about there in terms of what the ATO has said in that respect. The STP deferral, few people have asked about that as to whether or not the 1st of July 2018 is indeed the go live date for it. And certainly at this point in time, that is how we're seeing it. And I guess where some of the confusion may come from is back when the original announcement was made back in late 2014, it was touted as a 2016, 1st of July 2016 go live, and we're 2 years beyond that at this point in time. But certainly keep an ear to the ground. Stranger things have happened. We did see some fairly last minute deferrals of the SuperStream reporting. Sybiz was very much ready for that, well ahead of the game, and we did have a bit of egg on our face because I think when we did some webinars in March of that year, we were going full steam ahead as if it were happening, and then Canberra pulled the pin on it after we'd done our webinars. So that could happen again with STP, but again, make sure that you're getting that information from a reliable source. And if you have a group of companies that have more than 20 employees all up, but some companies within the group have less than 20, what impact does that have on my headcount? And again, this is something that should have well and truly been dealt with prior to or on or before rather the 1st of April 2018. But if you are a little bit confused, I'd suggest that you also go to the ATO's website, but essentially what that says there is that if you have a group of companies and they all employ less than 20 people, then they can be sort of treated as smaller employers in that respect. But if one of those companies employs more than 20, then all of the companies, including those that employ less than 20, will need to do single Dutch payroll reporting from the 1st of July 2018. So nice and confusing, but again, read that yourselves, get that clarity on the advice if you need from your external advisors to get that, I guess, better advice in the context of your own personal situations there. A lot of you asked about the fees as well. That's something that we've talked in the previous webinars as well about the tens of millions of dollars that's been invested by the industry, the software industry, and also a similar amount by the ATO to get ready for STP reporting. So people understand that that's costs that need to be passed on through to the customer base, and we've kept those as low as we possibly can, and we've talked about those in terms of giving you an indication of roughly what those fees will be, and by the time you get around to signing up for the employer portal, those fees will be set, and there'll be no confusion there. So that is, I guess, something just to look out for in the middle of June. So with that, apologies for running a little bit over time, and I thank you all very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks again. Bye.